In apologetics, I see personally seeking out objections against what one believes as the equivalent of a foreign spy getting dirt on the enemy team. Only difference here is that the information isn't hidden or locked away. It's only a few clicks away, in fact. And those clicks are what led me to the American Atheists, everyone's favorite fly in their bowl of soup. The unsightly twin of the Freedom from Religion Foundation that just always seems to rear its ugly head. I was reading online the other day and came across their page on biblical contradictions, Bible contradictions. And I thought to myself, you know what the heck, right? What are atheists leveling against Christians now in 2020, right? Because this is their page. They're going to be getting the most traffic here. And obviously they put it up there to be seen. So what's the best they have to offer? And my goodness, I don't say this to be snarky, but I'm just telling you what really happened. I was laughing. Within the first contradiction, I was laughing. And so I thought to myself, man, I've got to do a video on this just to let you guys know, because, I'm sure whether you're into apologetics hugely or not, you've come into contact with those who, allege that there are biblical contradictions. And so the purpose of this isn't to go through every single one, but just to go through the ones that they present on the site. And so we'll talk about them, go through them, maybe get a laugh or two in, and hopefully it's pretty good. So yeah, let's check it out. All right, so just pulling from their page here, they say, "It is a central dogma of all fundamental Christians that the Bible is without error. They teach this conclusion by reasoning that God cannot be the author of false meaning and he cannot lie. Is this true? If written by a perfect being, then it must not contradict itself. As a collection of books written by different men at different times over many centuries would be expected to contradict each other. With this in mind, let us have a look at the Bible on several subjects. The Sabbath day. Exodus 20 verse 8 says, 'Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy.' While Romans 14:5 says, 'One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind.' Any Christian who knows anything about the basic differences between the Old and New Testament knows what is referred to as the Old and New Covenant. The Old Covenant was an agreement between God and the Israelites comprised of various laws and practices meant to both keep them under God's mercy and separate them from surrounding nations. After Jesus' fulfillment of the Old Covenant via his sinless life, his death and resurrection ushered in what we now know as the New Covenant. So when you read that verse in Exodus 20, what you're reading is the account of the Israelites under that Old Covenant. And when you read that verse in Romans 14, what you're reading is that account of Jews and Gentiles alike under the New Covenant, which doesn't require these external regulations to be at peace with God, because all of that was done at the cross. All right, let's hit the next one. The permanence of the earth. Ecclesiastes 1:4 says that the earth abideth forever, while 2 Peter 3:10 says that the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Context, context, context. Without that key, you won't open most doors in life, including this one. And the context of Ecclesiastes is a book written from the worldview or the point of view of man. We see this man, who many propose to be Solomon, trying to find purpose in what the world has to offer. Money, pleasure, physical labor. None of these things do this for him, and instead we see him have this hopeless existence because of that. So Ecclesiastes is a book written from the perspective of man when one tries to find meaning or purpose in life and leaves God out of the equation. So in verse 4, the writer is speaking from man's perspective to show how we see things as continuing forever. Let's actually take a look at the surrounding verses so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor, in which he toils under the sun? One generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. And then skipping down to verse 9. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything new of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come, by those who will come after. So if you caught that emphasis there in verse 10, who's the us that Solomon, if we presume it's him, is referring to? Who's the us? It's man. All right, and so when we see the claims that he makes in verse 4 about the earth abiding forever, we recognize that it's from a faulty human perspective. So when comparing that to 2 Peter, when God says that he's going to judge the earth by burning it with fire, it's a very literal thing that he claims he'll do, we see no contradiction. All right, so let's keep it going. Genesis 32:30 states that I have seen God face to face and my life is preserved, while John 1:18 says that no man hath seen God at any time. So the heart of this criticism is really just two opposite claims. Right, on one end, we have verses saying that God can't be seen, which they do say. And then we also have verses where people are claiming to have seen God. And so how does this really work? I don't have the time to really go into all the textual proofs in the Old Testament for the Trinity, but the Trinity is exactly what is at work here. In the Old Testament, where we see God working face to face with these people, it's the pre-incarnate Christ. Because you even have verses in the New Testament where Jesus himself is saying that no one has seen the Father except the one who is from God. So therefore, we have to conclude that these people who are seeing God in the Old Testament are seeing, in fact, the pre-incarnate Christ, the one who has the manifestation that is bearable by humans. I also want to be sure to note that the Father is most certainly present within the Old Testament. It's just that we as humans cannot see him in his unveiled glory. In fact, as you read throughout the Bible, you'll see that when angels are before the throne themselves, they cover their faces with two of their wings to protect themselves. They can't do it either. And it's the same thing here. This is why in Exodus, when we see Moses talking with the Father, he descends in the cloud, or at the tent of meeting when the same thing happens. Even in the New Testament, after Jesus' transfiguration, the Father comes to the mountain in the cloud and speaks to the disciples. And so it's really just about understanding the nuances behind who's at play here and understanding the doctrine of the Trinity. But when you really look at it, there's no contradiction at work. Alrighty, and let's keep moving. All right, with this next one here being about human sacrifice, we can see how in Leviticus 18:21, God says, "Thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech." While in Judges 11, verses 30 through 31, it says that, "If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into my hands, then it shall be that whoever cometh forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering." So it's safe to say that the command in Leviticus is pretty standard. All throughout the Bible, we see this theme of how God hates human sacrifice and how the thought of it never even entered his mind, which is a pretty big claim showing his seriousness considering his omniscience. Nevertheless, we do have this account in Judges regarding Jephthah, who promised the Lord that if he gave him victory, he would sacrifice on a burnt offering, whatever the first thing was that came through his door. The first thing that came through his door was his daughter, and then the rest is history. Scholars have various interpretations surrounding the text. There are those who hold that the most natural reading of the text means that Jephthah actually did sacrifice her, while those on the other side believe that he merely dedicated her to the Lord's service. In favor of that view, they'll typically cite how her virginity was mourned as opposed to her actual dying, as well as how Jephthah wasn't condemned by the society at the time. Personally, I tend to lean more towards the first view that he actually did sacrifice her. However, I see this event more so as descriptive rather than prescriptive. This book isn't telling us that we should be doing what Jephthah did, it's merely telling us what he did. There's no advocation behind the description of it. It's erroneous to think that just because God gave Jephthah the victory, that he was somehow advocating for his daughter being killed. God's foreknowledge is not the same thing as his causing. Imagine how many people might have died had he not given Jephthah the victory. Similarly, think about all the heroes of the Bible that God has called, whether it be Abraham or Samson or Moses, and think about all the times that they sinned. Just because God called them and he knew that they would sin, that doesn't mean he's responsible for their sin. The point of this passage is to show that making a commitment without considering the implications of it is an unwise thing to do. And because of Jephthah's commitment to the vow that he made, his daughter paid the price. The power of God. In Matthew 19:26, it says that with God all things are possible. While in Judges 1:19, it says that the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron. Regarding Judges 1:19, newer translations render the he as people of Judah. Now, this may not be as apparent within the King James Version, but this is still the case if we just simply look at the surrounding verses. The same surrounding verses that the American Atheists happen to have just conveniently left out. Let's go ahead and check them out. "And Judah went with Simeon, his brother, and they slew the Canaanites that inhabited Zephath, and utterly destroyed it. And the name of the city was called Hormah. Also Judah took Gaza with the coast thereof, and Askelon with the coast thereof, and Ekron with the coast thereof. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron unto Caleb, as Moses said, and he expelled thence the 3 sons of Anak." Forgive me for that awful punctuation, but as you can see, who's doing the taking? Who's doing the destroying? Who's doing the driving out? It's Judah and any companions he's alongside with. And so we can see here that the subject in focus is Judah, with God being mentioned as being with him. But Judah being able to not take out the iron chariot says nothing about God's own power. Personal injury. "Thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. While in Matthew 5:39 we see that Jesus says, "Yet resist not evil, but whoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Despite what many people tend to think, the passage in Exodus is not promoting vengeance, it's actually limiting it, stating that the punishment can only fit the manner of the crime, which is exactly why we see this matching going on between different categories. Jesus himself said that he came not to abolish the law but to fulfill it, and that's exactly what he does in Matthew 5:39 when he says to turn the other cheek. Because just how Exodus sought to limit vengeance, Jesus went even further and actually limited vengeance not just in the external sense, but also in the heart. Meaning, on one hand, we can stop and say the punishment should fit the crime through our actions, but Jesus is also saying not only should the punishment fit the crime, but we should not have a personal retaliation within our hearts either, which is why he says to turn the other cheek. It doesn't mean be a pushover and not seek justice where it's rightly due, but what it means is that our heart should be in the place where we don't do anything out of spite or vengeance. Circumcision. Genesis says that this is my covenant, which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. While Galatians 5:2 says that if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. I won't spend too much time on this one just because it closely parallels the same issue that we saw in regards to the Sabbath day, which is basically this division between the Old and New Covenant. Under the Old Covenant, absolutely, Jews had to be circumcised as part of their customs. However, once Jesus came, fulfilled the law, died on the cross, and ushered in the New Covenant, that law, that external law that we had to fulfill was no longer necessary because it was done in Christ. And so that's exactly what Paul is talking about when he says that circumcision will profit you nothing if you still opt for those ways. We act as if we don't have a new covenant and we try to revert to the old. And that's exactly what Paul is advising against because of who Jesus is and what he did for us. And so with these next few passages regarding incest, we see how God has commands within Deuteronomy, Leviticus, as well as later chapters in Genesis, where he is basically condemning it. Whereas in earlier chapters in Genesis, despite Sarah being Abraham's half-sister, he blesses Sarah. The most obvious answer to this is that where there's no law, there's no transgression. And at that time with Abraham and Sarah, there was no law against incest that God had ordained. And so therefore they couldn't have sinned. All right, and so next they try to create a contrast between Proverbs 12:2, where it says that a good man obtaineth favor from the Lord, with that of Job, who obviously was a good man and yet still suffered a whole lot in life. Now, they're leaving out a whole bunch of info regarding this, but nevertheless, we'll still address it, which is basically that when it comes to Proverbs, these are just general principles and not meant to be universally applied. Meaning in a general sense, is someone who is good, will they obtain favor from the Lord? Yes. Not in terms of salvation or anything, but just in terms of general well-being. And in fact, that's exactly what we saw with Job even at the beginning of the story. He was blessed, he was rich, and God, in his sovereignty, reserves the right and has the prerogative to take that away as he sees fit, as long as he's consistent with his own nature. And he exactly was in Job in order to prove to Satan that those who are his can endure. So the key here is just to remember that with Proverbs, these are general principles, not meant to be universally applied. Now, should we still practice them? Absolutely. But we shouldn't get up in arms when they aren't fulfilled exactly how they claim to be, because they're just general. All right, so next, blasting through these, we have the holy lifestyle, where Ecclesiastes says, "Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, and drink thy wine with a merry heart." Whereas in 1 Corinthians, we see it says that they that rejoice, as though they rejoiced not. It should set an alarm how much was cut out of 1 Corinthians 7, but nevertheless, again, we'll address it. So, as I said before in regards to Ecclesiastes, it's written from man's perspective, and that's exactly what we see there in that verse. Man is saying to do these things, to go your way, to eat, drink, and be merry, because they just see this as the ultimate purpose of life, just acquiring pleasure. Now, in regards to 1 Corinthians 7:30, yeah, we really should be checking out the context of that verse. Let's do that real quick. "But this I say, brethren, the time is short. It remaineth, that both they that have wives be as though they had none, and they that weep as though they wept not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoiced not, and they that buy as though they possessed not, and they that use this world as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away." So if the American atheists want to be consistent with what their notion of 1 Corinthians 7:30 means, then they'd also have to claim that the Bible says it's forbidden for people to weep, since that's exactly what we see in the words just before it. No, the obvious interpretation here is that Paul is saying the days are short, and we need to be living as if we didn't have these things because these things can hold us down in life. He's not saying that they're sinful or that they're evil, but he's merely saying our focus should be in a much different and greater area, which is that of the Great Commission. Ezekiel 18:20 says that the son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, whereas Exodus 25 says that I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. I'm noticing that as we go along with these alleged contradictions, the manner in which they present them is getting more and more dishonest. Let's go ahead and check the later part of the verse within Exodus 20 verse 5, the part that they intentionally left out. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. So two things to notice there. One is obviously the those that hate me, characterizing those who are living in opposition to God and how he punishes them for it. But then notice at the beginning, he's speaking in the context of idol worship. So that's on top of it too. But obviously the American atheists left both of these out to further their narrative. But anyways, let's just keep it going because it's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. Okay, so next we see here in James 1:13, it says that let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. Whereas in Genesis 22, it says that, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham. So two important things to remember here. In the original language, the word for tempted can also mean tested. And even more so, if you just think through it logically, it wouldn't make any sense for God to tempt in that sense of the word. If he were trying to tempt Abraham to kill Isaac, then why would he stop Abraham from killing Isaac? Because he was going to do it. Now, they may say, well, no, he was trying to tempt him to disobey him. Well, if that's the case, then congratulations to the American atheists because they've managed to find the one passage in the entire Bible where God is actually hoping that a person does the opposite of what he tells them to do. Can you see the mental gymnastics here? Yeah, next one. Exodus 20 says to honor thy father and mother, where Luke 14:6 says that if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yeah, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. The American atheists have never heard of a hyperbole, but that's exactly what's going on here. Jesus isn't saying to literally hate your father, mother, etc. He's just merely stating that compared to one's love for him, for Jesus, their love for everyone else should basically be hate because of how vast the difference is. He's making a statement as to how great one should love God over how much one should love man. Almost done, guys. Right here, resurrection of the dead. Job 7:9 says that he that goeth down to the grave shall come up no more. Whereas John 5:28-29 says that the hour is coming in which all that are in the graves shall hear his voice and shall come forth. Main thing going on here to understand is that this is written from Job's perspective. This is a descriptive narrative in which we see his reaction and his response to the suffering that he's enduring. Now, in a way, this is a general principle. People die, but obviously there are exceptions. Jesus, the people that he raised from the dead, like Lazarus, as well as in the last days, the resurrections that take place there as well. And so absolutely, we have a general principle at work here. We also have a descriptive understanding of what's going on through Job's experiences, but this is not meant to be a universal thing. Alrighty guys, and then last one here, it talks about the end of the world, where in Matthew 16:28, Jesus says that verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Also in Luke 21, we see that Jesus says, verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall never pass away. There are more here, but I just want to focus on the top two because those have the most weight. So the main argument that the American atheists present behind these first two verses as well as the rest is that because they haven't happened yet, the Bible cannot be true. But let's take those first two verses one by one and see what they're really saying. In regards to Matthew 16:28, the most common interpretation is that Jesus was speaking about the coming transfiguration that would happen shortly after, in which he took up some of his disciples that would see that glimpse of him in his glory on top of the mountain. In regards to Luke chapter 21, a common interpretation isn't that Jesus is saying the generation he was a part of would be the one to see these things, but rather the generation that would be alive for the things he was describing would not pass away until all the things he was describing would be fulfilled. So because these things haven't happened yet, that doesn't mean the Bible isn't true. It just simply means they haven't happened yet. And so they're reading into the text things which I personally don't think are there. And so they close it out by so eloquently stating, what is incredible about the Bible is not its divine authorship, it's that such a concoction of contradictory nonsense could be believed by anyone to have been written by an omniscient God. To do so, one would have to first not read the book, which is the practice of most Christians, Or if one does read it, dump in the trash can one's rational intelligence to become a fool for God, in other words. To be an atheist, one need only be able to laugh when such obvious nonsense is offered as being divine truth. Yeah, it's funny the American Atheists mentioned trash cans because I think come Monday, once the garbage man comes to pick it up, the only thing that's going to be there is their argument. And I don't think it's recyclable either. Now, but in all seriousness, guys, I do this for you, all right? So have you heard of the American Atheists before? Have you heard about the type of things that they've done in legislation and in public policy? Have you heard about these arguments before, these alleged contradictions? Maybe there's one I didn't talk about that you've heard quite commonly. Let me know in the comments below and maybe we'll talk about it for a next video. But either way, I want to hear your guys' thoughts, all right? So I really thank you for your support. The coronavirus has got my school transferred into all online classes, so it's given me a ton of time to now invest in a lot of exciting things for the third apology. A lot of things I think you guys will be all about. And so please share, please support, please help us get the word out. Please keep me in your prayers and I'll keep you in mine. And let's do this together, shall we?